right, good morning and welcome to Breaking Points.
That's right. It's Tuesday, I guess, so we have to be breaking points. How you doing, Ryan?
We should just all be breaking points, right?
Maybe.
Just wrap it all up.
Yeah, I guess it's time. Who knows?
Yeah,
We're just making major decisions with that Sagar and Crystal, so that's okay.
That's the time to make them, actually.
Exactly.
So today we're going to have my drop site colleague Jeremy Scahill on the show to talk about the latest between Israel and Gaza and Yemen and Syria and Lebanon, all of which they are bombing. Jeremy just returned from a major interview with Osama Hamdan, who's a senior political figure at Hamas, as well as a bunch of other background interviews with other Hamas officials that he can sketch out kind of where they're feeling, what they're where they're at in the negotiations as Israel is threatening to literally quote flatten Gaza. Donald Trump is promising to make Hollywood great again. Hollywood is kind of panicked.
100% tariff.
That
yes.
We're gonna figure out what it means to tariff a movie.
Yes, we are going to figure it out, actually. Well, I mean, who knows whether we'll figure it out, but the Trump administration is trying to figure it out at this very moment, and maybe they'll learn that there's really no good way to do it and quietly drop this news. But Trump's made this announcement on Sunday. Hollywood was in panic all day yesterday, also trying to figure out what it meant, so we will have updates on that.
When you promise to help someone and they panic at the thought, that's got to be kind of an odd feeling.
Yeah, well, on some level.
And he did kind of step back a little. He's like, I'm just trying to help.
Well, I mean, we'll get into all of it. Then we also have former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis, who's going to join us to go through some of the latest on tariffs. If
you guys don't know Yanis, he's amazing. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, oh my gosh, he's super interesting. So good time to talk to him. We're going to be discussing a little bit of from Bill Maher's panel last week. There was Kevin McCarthy talking about how AOC and Bernie are really the future of the party. So there's news about AOC in the Oversight Committee. There's all kinds of fun stuff to get into.
And Brian Kemp announced that he's not going to run for Senate, which immediately has the Ossoff for president crowd.
Yes.
Just wondering, just basically measuring the drapes at 1600 Pennsylvania for President Ossoff at this point.
They're ready to go, yeah. Ossoff Nation, rise up. Gain of function research executive order was signed yesterday by Donald Trump. So we'll break down all of that. And then, Ryan, we have a guest who's going to talk about some developments in a case that we've covered before. Yes.
So Henry McKean Shapiro was one of the protesters arrested by AG Dana Nessel in Michigan. Spent 4 days in jail. Yesterday, with a handful of others, had his charges dropped. We're going to talk about what those charges were, where they stemmed from, why they were dropped, and we're going to be joined by Henry to talk about what his experience was like behind bars and what he was told he was arrested for, because it does appear that these people were arrested for nothing other than protesting. Like there are no allegations of actual crimes.
Yeah, and just as a heads up, by the way, we started a little bit late today. Ryan has kids to take care of. I assume they're the ones who painted your nails.
My wife's yes, exactly. You like that? Which hand do you like better?
I mean the colorful one, obviously. Your daughters did that?
Yeah, they did. They've started a nail salon in our house.
Whoa, okay, capitalism.
It's called Slay Nails. So I was one of their first customers. But yes, wife's still recovering from surgery, so I'm just helping get the kids out to school. So when I am co-hosting this week and next, we'll be a little bit later than normal. We're often a little bit later than normal. This time we have an actual excuse.
Yes. Well, it's, whatever we can do to get our fix of Ryan Grimm.
There you go.
We will do it. All right, let's
And they're starting to chip.
Yeah,
so I kind of need to go back to Slay Nails.
Do you get a discount?
Well, and I didn't let him put the thing on this. It would help him stay longer. I was like, this is good.
Yeah.
I didn't pay anything for it, so I don't know if that's a discount or not.
I guess you can go back.
I don't think they've thought about their business model very deeply.
Okay. Well, maybe they should become part of Dropsite.
They don't pay for the inputs.
This could be a Dropsite thing.
So
I don't know. We'll see.
They don't really have to charge.
Well, let's bring Jeremy in. Speaking of Dropsite, let's go ahead and bring Jeremy in to hear from him about his recent interview with Hamas.
Joining us to discuss all this is my drop site colleague, Jeremy Scahill, who just returned from an interview with senior political Hamas figure Osama Hamdan and others. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here today.
Good to be with you guys.
And so let's put A4 up on the screen to start. This is the first piece that you've rolled out from this interview, this very wide-ranging interview with Osama Hamdan. Tell us what your kind of main takeaway was from this as it relates to Israel's most recent demand that Hamas needs to disarm within, agree to disarm within the next week, return all of the hostages, or else it's going to, quote, flatten Gaza.
I mean, Ryan, I think the first thing to be said is that over the past 18 months, there has been almost no substantive interviewing of leaders of Hamas or other Palestinian resistance factions by Western news organizations. It's not that they're not interviewed. It happens. CNN has had interviews, NBC has had interviews, but often what happens is that you have one of two things unfold. Either it's a very short interview responding to something that the United States has said or something that Israel has said, or it's an interview where it's just entirely intended to be a relitigation of the events of October 7th. And one of the things that we've tried to do at DropSite is to say this is journalistic malpractice, not to understand the perspective of the leadership of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or any Palestinian leaders who are at the center of what is a US-backed Israeli war of annihilation. So that's the spirit in which we've been conducting these interviews. Now, Osama Hamdan is perhaps one of the most well-known leaders within Hamas because he was based in Lebanon when the Israeli war began in October of 2023. He was one of the few officials that was actually in a country where Hamas was allowed to publicly hold press conferences. And so he became a very well-known figure in the Arabic language media. He's been a member of Hamas since 1992, just a few years after the organization was founded. He was the former head of its operations in Iran, former head of its operations in Lebanon, and was the former head of its international relations department. He's actually a chemist by training, a very, very well-educated guy who speaks excellent English. And so I sat down with him on the record about a 90-minute interview, but I did spend several hours meeting with Osama Hamdan and other senior leaders within Hamas. So part of what we can talk about today is what was said on the record, and then I can give you some texture of the broader perspective of people. I haven't spoken about this yet, so this will be the first time I kind of go through some of what I've heard. On the main issue that you're raising, Ryan, Hamas has now staked out a very clear position that it hasn't in such a clear way in the past 18 months. And what Osama Hamdan told me is that Hamas is absolutely not going to agree to any more short-term truces unless there is a clear path back to one of two places. Either back to the original framework of the January ceasefire deal that was brokered by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. That deal, which Israel blew up after the first 42-day phase, imposed this full-spectrum blockade on Gaza, no food, no medicine, no fuel. Nothing has entered the Gaza Strip in the past 2 months. And then on March 18th, Israel starts scorched earth bombing Gaza again, killing more than 400 people in the opening night. Since then, 2,400 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of them women and children. Horrifying attacks, too, burning people alive in tents, using so-called suicide drones to attack camps for displaced people. And what Hamas is saying is, we either are going to go back to that framework, and the second phase of that framework, which Israel wanted to avoid getting into, said that there would be a total withdrawal of all Israeli forces and that there would be technical negotiations moving toward a permanent ceasefire, followed then by a full reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. So either we go back to that, or we go to an alternative arrangement, which also has a very clear path to the end of the war, full Israeli withdrawal, and reconstruction. Hamas has said, we have a different proposal that we want to put forward in response to Israel, and that is what is called in Arabic a hudna, which means a long-term truce. And so Osama Hamdan said they are offering Israel a truce of 5 to 7 years, the immediate release of all Israeli captives, living and dead, and an internationally guaranteed agreement that Hamas and other Palestinian resistance factions are not going to engage in any offensive operations against Israel, and that they are interested in long-term stability and peace and an ability to rebuild Gaza. So They said, though, that no matter what the deal is, they are not going to lay down their weapons. They said it's not just a red line, it's a million red lines. They said that laying down their weapons would be tantamount to capitulating and surrendering. And once they surrender, then they're at the will of the occupier. So this was what I believe the clearest on the record statement that we've gotten to date from Hamas, that they will not accept any of the proposals that have been put forward by the United States or Israel that do not include a clear path to full Israeli withdrawal, and they will absolutely not agree to hand in their weapons under any circumstances.
You know, Jeremy, one of the interesting things that stood out to me from your report is that they actually, all of that, and also they feel obligated not to put their weapons down, right? Could you tell us more about that part of the conversation? I mean, as I understood it, it was they see it as an obligation to continue going, not just sort of the practical thing that's best for them, but also as something that they must do to keep going forward.
Yeah, it's an important question, Emily. You know, let's remember that oftentimes when events in Gaza are discussed in the broader Western media or the Israeli media, the story begins on October 7th with Hamas's attacks and what Hamas calls Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. But this is actually a 76-year history. I mean, you could go all the way back to the 1930s and the Palestinians resisting British occupation. But let's say that the dominant narrative or the dominant historical arc here begins in 1947-48 with the Nakba, which is when the United States and European powers stole the land from Palestinians and established a state primarily for Europeans that were victims of the Holocaust or were at jeopardy of being killed during the Holocaust. And so that state was established, and the idea at the time that was promoted by Zionists and also the West was that it was a people without a land for a land without a people. Well, there were a people there, and they were called the Palestinian people. And in fact, there were Muslims and Jews living in relative peace on that land until the establishment of the State of Israel. So the perspective from the Palestinian side, and this is not just Hamas. I spoke with Palestinian leaders who are not even members of armed resistance factions who will say that every time the Palestinians have agreed to lay down their weapons, that they have then just been massacred and wiped out. So it's not just about a strategic position that Hamas is taking. They, for instance, Osama Hamdan said, look, we can look at the example of the north of Ireland when the provisional IRA decommissioned itself and handed in its weapons. That was part of a many years long process, and it was agreed to by both sides. Hamdan said to me, look, this business about storing our weapons temporarily, he said, first of all, that's just a media story. No one has ever seriously raised that with us. But are they going to tell the Israelis to store their weapons? Who's going to monitor, the Israelis? Because every time we have a ceasefire, they continue to bomb us. So I think it's very clear. And the issue of armed resistance remains one of the most popular position points in all of historic Palestine, not just in Gaza. The right of Palestinians to use armed resistance against an occupation, an apartheid state that has been repeatedly condemned under international law by world courts and by every major human rights organization in the world. They believe if they lay down their weapons, the cause of Palestinian statehood and liberation is totally dead.
And so we let's put up A2 briefly, because this references. This is an Axios News report about the flattening of Gaza that they're threatening if there's no deal by the time Trump makes his upcoming trip to the region. And you can add A3 as well. Here's a kind of map that's been circulating that is where they're suggesting basically they're going to take upwards of 2 million Palestinians, move them into a tiny quote unquote humanitarian zone, and they don't really say what they're going to do next beyond, invade, occupy, and hold the ground rather than kind of move in and move back out, which allowed then, Hamas to move back in after the IDF would move out. And so Hamas has this proposal, this counter proposal of a 5 to 7 year truce. Donald Trump likes to talk about cards. You don't have any cards. Who has the cards? What are the cards that, from your reporting, that Hamas has left to play against Israel? Like what makes it so that this is a serious counterproposal that Israel needs to take seriously? And from the Israeli side, they're talking about calling up tens of thousands of reservists. do they have the cards? Do they have the ability to carry out this invasion and long-term occupation and complete ethnic cleansing that they're suggesting they're going to carry out?
I mean, there's a technical answer to your question, and then there's a much bigger answer to your question. First, the technical answer. Anyone you speak to from a Palestinian resistance faction that is holding captives, Israeli captives inside of Gaza, will say, this is our only card right now that we have. And so when the Israelis propose short-term truces with no clear path to an end to the war or an Israeli withdrawal, and they try, for instance, to get half of the living Israeli captives out in one fell swoop, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, look at that and they say, this is a death trap for us. From their perspective, they believe that they have kept as many Israeli captives alive as Israel has been killing them with its own bombings. You know, we don't know the fate, for instance, of American citizen Aidan Alexander, who was in the Israeli military when he was taken by Palestinian fighters on October 7th, 2023. Hamas's armed wing Qassam brigades lost touch with him some weeks ago after an Israeli airstrike, and I was told by two senior Hamas officials that they still do not know his fate. So from the perspective of Palestinian resistance movements, their only card in these negotiations right now is the fact that they are holding Israeli captives. In the bigger picture, though, they feel that they have a moral and a legal card and also a very strong card in the region. And that is that international resolution after international resolution has declared Israel's occupation illegal. You have a genocide proceeding that is going forward at the International Court of Justice, and you have Arab regimes, anti-democratic Arab regimes, that are watching very nervously the events on the ground unfold as Netanyahu expands Israel's attacks across the region. Public anger is growing inside the capitals and borders of many Arab nation states, and we could be at the beginning of a period where we start to see potentially major revolts happening internally in Arab countries against their rulers, against their governments, in part because they have stood silently by as the Palestinians have been subjected to genocide, or because they've normalized relations with Israel under the auspices of Donald Trump's Abraham Accord. So the Palestinians are great students of history. And one thing I just want to say parenthetically, every time I speak to an official from one of these Palestinian resistance movements, it's remarkable. They are doctors, they're lawyers, they're Islamic scholars, they're veterinarians, they're engineers. Osama Hamdan himself is a chemist. Several of them have been educated in Western countries, including the United States. The portrayal of them, you can think what you want about their positions, their policies, their actions, but the portrayal of these individuals as cartoonish villains who are interested in killing Jewish people because they're Jewish is so just clearly false. And part of what I was told, and we could talk about the details of this, Ryan and Emily, I met with both Hamas officials that led the talks with Adam Boehler, who was Donald Trump's special envoy on hostages. One thing I found interesting is they didn't know that he had been at Jared Kushner's roommate or that he's a personal friend of the Trump family. And when I shared that, they said, well, that makes sense why he's still around, because Israel tried to destroy Adam Boehler after he made the mistake of just saying that he was surprised at the kind of interactions that he had with Hamas. But they described to me very cordial, friendly at times, diplomatic meetings with Adam Boehler. They said that Boehler asked a lot of probing questions, not just about the current political situation or the situation from October 7th forward, but that he seemed truly interested in understanding the historical perspective of the Palestinians. And they said he just kept remarking on how they are so different than they seem from the portrayal that he had read. And what they told me is that they had these good meetings with Boehler. It wasn't just about the American captives that are being held. It was about a broader political solution. The Israelis go nuts when they learn that these direct talks had happened and that Boehler is out there in public saying on American television and Israeli television that Hamas has proposed a multi-year peace deal with Israel. Ron Dermer was just like yanking his hair out, Netanyahu's political hitman who's in charge of the negotiations now. And they said, so, the Americans are subjected to this thing where Adam Boehler is now being smeared and targeted for having the audacity to say some basic civil things or observations about Hamas. But what happened, Ryan, is that there was supposed to be a subsequent meeting directly with Steve Witkoff, who was Donald Trump's the top envoy negotiating all of these deals with not just with Gaza, but also Ukraine. They were going to have direct talks with Steve Witkoff, and Hamas was confident that the way the dialogue was going, that the Americans were actually understanding the position and understanding that Hamas did, in fact, have some flexibility in its position. And Hamdan said he believes that part of the reason why Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, the former political leader of Hamas, and has been assassinating others, is because Israel doesn't want anyone capable of actually speaking with the United States to be alive to do so.
And this gets to the question Ryan was asking about the cards that Israel has. A clip here of Donald Trump yesterday being asked about some of this. We can go ahead and roll A1 now.
We're going to help the people of Gaza get some food. People are starving, and we're going to help them get some food. A lot of people are making it very, very bad. If you look, Hamas is making it impossible because they're taking everything that's brought in. But we're going to help the people of Gaza because they're being treated very badly by Hamas. Thank you very much.
Hostage families were protesting Netanyahu's decision yesterday as well. So, Jeremy, can you tell us what you make of the last 24 hours after your conversations about all of this with the other side?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, either Donald Trump is lying or he's being intentionally fed bad information. I mean, you can talk to anti-Hamas people involved with international aid on the ground, and they'll tell you that it is entirely false that there is any significant amount of aid that is being stolen or commandeered by Hamas. In fact, when private gangs that many Palestinians suspect are in some way or another collaborating with Israel have been trying to loot supplies of aid, when the civil police force, this is not Qassam brigades, but when the civil police force in Gaza tries to respond to this looting, Israel has then attacked the police who are trying to prevent the looting from happening. And of course, there were executions recently of people that were involved in looting, and people made a big deal about this, and it was portrayed as, Hamas is executing Palestinians who are just trying to get food. The reality on the ground is that some of the most powerful and influential families in Gaza were demanding that somebody somewhere take action to stop the looting of what little aid is left inside of the Gaza Strip. So, we should be reporting accurately and factually on these matters, and not falling into this trap of looking for every incendiary story that we can hype. And it turns out that it's actually not even based on something that is fully true. On this issue that Trump is raising, though, I'll tell you something that I learned in my reporting. A few weeks ago, the Israelis approached, my sources told me, the United Nations, and they tried to get the United Nations to agree to take charge of distributing aid on behalf that Israel would send in. But Israel had a long list of conditions about how many calories could be in each packet, about who could receive the aid, about the kind of security checks that Palestinians would be subjected to if they wanted to receive aid, about the kind of checkpoints they would have to pass through and the distances they would have to travel. And the United Nations told Israel, we're not going to participate in that because it's weaponizing the use of food for crimes of war. So then the Israelis go to international aid organizations. Now, I'm told that some aid organizations initially were considering going along with Israel's plan, in part because they felt that the situation was so dire that it was a compromise to make. Other aid organizations then looked at what Israel's terms were and said, absolutely not. These are de facto internment conditions. That's a direct quote from a letter signed by 20 aid organizations. So these international aid organizations said, we won't participate in weaponizing food for Israel's war aims. So what Israel is now left with, and Trump is referring to, is that they've come up with a plan. They've already divided Gaza into 3 sections with these 2 massive corridors. Is they're essentially going to try to push as much of the Palestinian population toward the south as possible into Rafah, which basically doesn't exist as anything vaguely resembling a city anymore. They're going to work with potentially an American security company and others, and they're going to force Palestinians to go through extensive security checks just to get some food to eat. So, it now is the case that Israel and the United States seem to be trying to engage in a propaganda campaign that also weaponizes food as a tool of war in an effort to say, oh, look, we're helping the starving Palestinians. This is a way to avoid having to make an actual deal that would bring some peace and stability and would halt this genocide.
And in your interview, Hamdan responded to the Egyptian proposal, which he rejected out of hand, which effectively required Hamas to fully disarm. You're also saying that they're willing to move. They're willing to make some concessions. So what would be the concessions that Hamas is willing to make in order to get to this 5 to 7 year truce? Now, saying that there would be no offensive operations, obviously that's a concession as well, because up to today their stated position is they will continue carrying out offensive operations against Israel until they say they won't. So it's just, that alone is one. How would they allow that to be internationally guaranteed while also maintaining their weapons?
So one thing on this issue of offensive, Hamas would say all of their operations are defensive because Israel is an illegitimate, illegal, occupying power. Just to be clear, that's their position on that.
Well, doesn't that undercut their promise then? If they're because what Israel wants is them not to do another October 7th.
Yeah, I mean, they're not playing like semantics here. I think what they're saying is we're not going to attack Israel unless we are directly attacked militarily. Like they're not going to launch an operation that in the existential sense of it is defensive in nature from their perspective. But it's an interesting question. First of all, let me say this. What I was told by Hamas officials is we don't actually want to be the government of Gaza. We won democratic elections in 2006, not just in Gaza, but in all of the Palestinian territories. Ismail Haniyeh was supposed to be the prime minister of all Palestinian territories, not just Gaza. A civil war then breaks out between Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah party and Hamas in Gaza in 2007 that results in an effective split of the Palestinian government, where you have Abbas and Fatah controlling the occupied West Bank, and then you had Gaza controlled by Hamas. The United States and other Western countries immediately impose sanctions, and Israel imposes a blockade on Gaza. So the place has been being strangled ever since then. There hasn't been a democratic election since, not because Palestinians don't want it, but because it's been convenient for Mahmoud Abbas not to have such elections. So Hamas is essentially viewing it as we're stuck being the government. One Hamas official said to me, "Do you know what happens if we don't pay people, that are on our payroll, or what happens if the garbage isn't picked up? People protest against us like they would anywhere else." So it's an interesting point. So they're saying we don't even want to be the government anymore. But if we sign this kind of a deal, we will fully relinquish all control of Gaza. We will submit to the democratic will of the Palestinian people. We'll go one of two ways. Egypt has made a proposal that there could be a sort of technocratic committee of experts that would govern Gaza until democratic elections could be organized and held. Or you could do something under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority, even though Hamas is extremely critical of Mahmoud Abbas, who they perceive as a collaborator with the Israeli regime. They and other Palestinian factions have submitted 40 to 45 names as suggestions for people that they would accept on a committee, and they're willing to submit to the authority of the Palestinian Authority. They're political rivals. That's a massive political concession that Hamas is making. On the issue of weapons, what Hamas has said is there will be no need for resistance factions to have any weapons if Palestine as a state is allowed to constitute its own military and police forces capable of defending its territorial integrity. The final thing I'll say about this is Osama Hamdan said to me, I thought he was going to say there's no, I asked him about two-state solution, what's called two-state solution. I thought he was going to say it's dead in the water. I've been told that by other Palestinian resistance figures. He said Israel is the party destroying the two-state solution, and Hamas would welcome a two-state solution if a majority of Palestinians voted for it. We would never stand in the way of it. If it was constituted along the pre-1967 war borders, if East Jerusalem was the capital, and if Israel was forced through international oversight by the United States and others to respect those boundaries, that Hamas would not stand in the way of a two-state solution. So, people can dismiss what Hamas is saying, but since 1992-93, the Hamas leadership has been proposing these long-term truce deals with Israel, which are intended to create a multi-year but defined period where Hamas and other resistance groups will agree to engage in no attacks unless they're militarily attacked, in the hopes that there can be a longer-term political solution. From Donald Trump's perspective, that doesn't sound like a bad deal. And I think that's why the Israelis didn't want someone like Adam Boehler, who's a friend of the Trump family, or Steve Witkoff directly speaking to Hamas, because it might put in their heads the idea Trump could actually preside over a very long-term deal.
Yeah, I think if Trump just, and Amir Tabon and Haaretz wrote a column saying this, if Trump just tweeted, the same way he tweeted at Putin, Vladimir, stop, if he tweeted, this is what Tabon had written, Benjamin, stop, get the hostages out, make a deal. Like, that would actually work. Like, tweeting at Putin, not going to get you very far. That tweet might actually work. Before you leave, I wanted to get your response to what Israel has been doing instead. If we can put up A7 real quick from the Drop Site Twitter feed. In the last 24 hours, Israel has bombed eastern and southern Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Gaza. It's almost easier at this point to report, which neighboring countries Israel is not bombing. I'm curious, let's put up the one before that, which is A5. I'm curious from your conversations with the Hamas officials. This is a Houthi spokesperson saying that that the Houthis are going to shut down air travel on an ongoing basis into Israel in response to Israel's siege on Gaza. They're saying that their strike on Ben Gurion Airport is going to be repeated, and he warns international airlines not to fly into Ben Gurion Airport. I'm curious, two things. One, how did Hamas respond to this kind of escalating war that's now involving almost every country touching Israel? And how do they feel about the Houthi response in solidarity?
I think not just Hamas, not just Palestinians. I think that really sharp observers in the region of history understand that what has happened is that Israel has run around throwing a lot of punches, and they think that they've knocked out all of their adversaries. But no one can predict what the counterstrike is going to look like. I had one very senior Palestinian resistance figure tell me last week that Israel is going to be wishing one day that Hamas was back, because what's going to come next is going to be a much more radical, much more ferocious enemy, because a whole generation of children, not just in Gaza, not just in the West Bank, but now in Lebanon, the children that were maimed by the pager bomb plot, the Yemenis who are being bombed on a regular basis by the United States and Israel, increasingly Syrians. This generation that rises up is going to be coming of age in the shadow of one of the most brutal campaigns of lethal arson waged by an Israeli leader in history. And so while Netanyahu might feel that he's at the zenith of his life's mission to take it to all of these resistance factions and try to redraw the maps of the Middle East, history shows that this is only the opening salvo, and what comes next is likely to be much more ferocious than what Netanyahu and Israel have dealt with to date. So, Trump should tread very, very carefully in his embrace of this arsonist agenda, because history shows that what comes next, the fire next time is going to be much more ferocious.
Yeah, I could imagine, 10, 15 years from now, Israeli officials looking back at the Hamas proposal of a 5 to 7 year truce, handing over power to a civilian authority as something that they would desperately like to go back and be able to take.
Ryan, can I tell you one bit of news that's one bit of news that I haven't reported anywhere, but I feel it's appropriate to share it with you guys. Our colleague Hossam Shabbat was assassinated in late March by Israeli forces, and Israel had alleged that he was a Hamas sniper in the Beit Hanun battalion of the Qassam brigades. I've been asking Palestinian officials about this from Hamas, and what I was told is that they actually did an audit. They wanted to get to the bottom of this, and they actually had Qassam brigades search documents, interview people. What I was told is that they are saying that not only was Hossam Shabbat not a sniper and not in the Qassam brigades, that he was not even a member of Hamas. And they formally told me, and they are alleging this, that the documents that Israel released purporting to show that Hossam Shabbat and other journalists are members of Hamas are fabricated documents. That's what Hamas told me on the record.
Yeah, and the document that they were circulating about Hossam, it suggested he would have been, I think, like 16 years old when he was in some training camp. And what I can't understand about Israeli fabricated documents is why they don't make them more credible. Remember the one where the guy would have been 11 when he was in it? Like, if you're going to fabricate the document, like, at least try to make it, like, you have a blank space in front of you. Like the page is blank. You can put whatever numbers you want in there. Why make it so incredible? That's interesting though that they dived into those accusations. Do they plan on putting anything officially out about that? It's hard to. There's no document that I guess that could.
Well, I was raising it with them because he's our colleague,
Yeah.
and so I had really been pushing them and saying like, can you? Is there any legitimacy to this? Is there something maybe that they're basing it on? I think that's the responsible thing to do as a journalist when these kinds of allegations are levied against a colleague. And it's been weeks and weeks I've been pushing them on that, and finally they said, okay, we've done that, and we've done this audit. Now people could say, oh well, Hamas is going to say that. Not really. I mean, Hamas and Qassam are they claim they're martyrs publicly. And so, their initial response was, no, nobody's ever heard of it. And I said, no, well, that, you can say that, but I mean, have you actually checked? And so I was quite surprised when I met personally with them that they said, we actually did that, and here's our finding.
Yeah. No, you're right. That people should understand that point, that if somebody dies who's in Qassam, they very publicly will claim him. Say like he was a martyr in this, and we'll list all of the different affiliations. So that is the history. That's accurate.
Yeah. Jeremy, thank you so much. The story was fantastic.
Thanks, Emily. Thank you, Ryan.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.